All right, so you guys were probably expecting a live stream to start, and as you can tell, that's not happening. I just kind of wanted to explain what happened, just the kind of the whole story behind the scenes. There's going to be a lot more that I'll talk about later on in the week, possibly on Sunday. But, before I get into it, if it's anything that you take away from this video, I just want to say that we really appreciate everybody who took time out of their day, spent lots of money, spent a lot of their effort and basically life in supporting this cause, this movement. This movement isn't me. It isn't anybody, actually. It's a collective group of all of us. And we've kind of compartmentalized everything, where we have kind of like supporters and people who are petitioning, like internal management of kind of events and working with figuring out with what little we have, getting to what we need to get done. And in that whole entire aspect, unfortunately, we've sort of failed. But it's not a full fail, in my opinion, but I can definitely understand people's standoffishness and people's want to possibly change things, and we're all very open to doing that. So before we get into that, I just really do want to thank everybody for how much time they put into this. Some of us basically, from morning to night, we're pretty much dealing with replying to questions, setting up events, setting up just basically logistics of everything. And we really are very grateful for everybody that did that. What I want to do today is I just kind of want to give you guys just kind of a full from start to finish as far as what I've witnessed and what I was doing. And just to kind of not really like come clean or anything like that, but it's just more of I kind of came in the middle of everything starting up, and I feel like at some points the actual work of others, with the view that a lot of people have seen from me, I'm pretty public facing about this, that I don't want it to seem like I'm taking like all the credit for all the hard work that was done before I had started. So I just kind of want to go through the involvement that I was in, and just kind of go through that, and answer some questions that a lot of people have had multiple times, and that we just felt like this wasn't the place, or this wasn't the time to do that. I feel like today is the time. So I pretty much started doing this. I had run a website beforehand that lasted all of a month, called GF News. It was a news organization ran by me and a buddy, and we basically were doing news in Grand Forks, but we were mostly going to be streaming Police Scanner Band, just because a lot of people find enjoyment in listening about what's going on in town. So I was working on a story that was covering cannabis, and this was around the time that we at this point that we had submitted in our first copy of the petition. A lot of people may have heard a lot about that. We were basically kind of scrambling at it, and while we were typing everything up, we had hit the spell check button, and North Dakota got spell checked the wrong way. So shortly after, At around that time, there was also another news story that was floating around and was starting up, where a journalist had searched up the name of all the sponsors that were on the first petition. And during that time, they had brought up the criminal background of every single person on there. And it had come out that there was some people that had a criminal background that a lot of people in the public didn't feel like was a good starting point for a petition that would be legalizing cannabis. So shortly after they had basically brought back the petition, they took it back and they were going to rework on it. Now, the story that I was working on was the taking back the story. So in that time, I didn't really know too much about cannabis in North Dakota. I didn't know that there was two groups at the time. Now I'm very well aware that there's two groups, and I think a lot of people have a question about why there's two groups, why there's Legalize ND and why there's ND Cannabis Caucus. So during Measure 3, there was a measure that was circulating and had went onto the ballot, and it failed, barely. I think it was 43%, so it wasn't a complete loss. But during that time, and I actually became vocal about it because cannabis to me, I've cared about cannabis before, and I never really got involved into politics of it, but when it came to the law side of it, because I have been involved with the law of that sort, I had kind of had my own opinions. So I, during that time, I was posting in the Legalize ND or Measure 3 campaign. I'm not 100% sure which Facebook group it was, but when it was kind of found out that it failed, it didn't pass, I had kind of commented here and there, and I gave my own opinion. And one of the responses that I got back was, "Hey, you seem to know a lot. Why don't you help out?" Now, I never thought I would actually be acting on that call to action when that happened. I never really thought that that was something that I wanted to do. Again, very little background in politics, never managed a campaign or done anything like that. So when I had done this story, I had talked to them, was wondering why there was two groups. A lot of people, when I was trying to get in contact with people, some of the people were like, yeah, you probably want to talk to this group more than the other group, just because they felt like they were going to be easier to be kind of cold approached and talked to, and that was this group, ND Cannabis Caucus. And when I had talked to people, I had only really met one person, and when we did an interview with him, I quickly realized that it wasn't, the front was very, very professional. The views were very professional. But the back end and talking and the conversation, I felt like there obviously wasn't a lot of knowledge when it comes to campaigning. Again, I was never in it, so I didn't really know what to expect, but what I walked away with was, hey, there's kind of everywhere. So I basically had done that interview, and sorry, I wrote down some stuff because I don't want to jump over anything, but when I had that interview, they did walk out, or they did talk to me and say, hey, you know what, if you want to know more about us, because that was the question, what happened to the two groups, if you want to know more about us, come to a meeting. So I came to that meeting. It was on Discord. It was very easy to get onto. It was on Discord, and that's when I had asked about the two campaigns. And basically what I had learned was the Measure 3 campaign, there was a lot of differing views and differing ways of managing the campaign. That's not to say one way was wrong and the other way was right. It was just a different view. So after talking with them, I guess what ended up happening was when it failed, there was two different views. There was two different attack sides almost. One was the statutory and the other one was the constitutional. And the constitutional one was basically, hey, you don't have to know everything about the law and everything about every aspect of it. The Constitution builds a framework for the laws that end up trickling down to statutory. And that was the differing view. It was also a differing view of how things were managed, and in the time that I was actually a part of this campaign, it was very, very solidified in me based on how people were acting and how things were being done, what the good aspects of it and what the bad aspects of it are. So basically, when I had come to that meeting, they kind of checked me out, saw that I had a decent looking website. It wasn't getting a lot of traffic or anything like that, but they had noticed, hey, this guy knows technology. He knows video work. He knows tech as far as website development and everything like that. And I had been in website development since high school. In the junior year of high school, I ran my school's website. It's not that huge of a deal, but I'm just saying I had a little bit of knowledge of what I was walking into as far as the tech side of things. So essentially, when I started working on the tech of the website and setting up all the website and how everything would be laid out, I had noticed that there was a lot of disorganization, that there was, not really set names or set titles for anybody of what anybody did. It was kind of, hey, you know how to do this, can you help us and do this? And if you can, and you have enough time to put towards it, you can go ahead and do this and let us know if we need to support you in any way. It was free work. It wasn't like anybody was getting paid. So there wasn't much to be expected out of it. So when you took on a project, essentially, you weren't expected to, request money for it. You weren't expected to kind of hold everybody accountable almost for everything. And that was a downfall, but I feel like after figuring out the structure and figuring out how everyone should go and, what people's strengths are, because that wasn't figured out at the time, what people's strengths were, and figuring out, where to put them, that they would be best for the campaign. So during that time, while we were working through all of that, we had hired a lawyer to write up the petition that you see now, the measure, and we had gotten the wording of the measure. And so we had this measure. This happened in the middle of a meeting, actually, surprisingly, that had a decent amount of people in it. And at the time, there was a chairperson at the first measure, and when we had pulled it back and everything like that, he was fine. There wasn't really any criminal background or anything like that for him. So we had basically brought it to him because he was kind of the main sponsor. And the measure does have to have a set amount of sponsors, so we needed to make sure that everybody who was sponsoring and everybody who had put their name out in public like that was okay with everything. And we ended up having a conversation. There was a lot of things that were different. There was a set number of plants. There was the designation for the age, which was the same age as the first one, at least that I can recall. But it was kind of more laid out rather than the 3 sentences that the first measure was. This one was laid out legally. It was tested in other states. This was based off of other states' constitutional laws as far as cannabis goes. So we felt pretty strongly with what we had gotten, and we had a debate almost, just kind of a conversation about it. It did get a little heated, but I don't think anybody walked away angry at each other. So basically at one point it went on for about 5 hours. And we had basically kind of agreed to, hey, let's sleep on it. Let's kind of, take a couple minutes or take a couple hours to think about it, come back, make a list if you need to, come back and say what you feel are the strengths and the weaknesses of the wording as it was. And while that was going on, some people had decided, hey, maybe this isn't for me. Or, hey, maybe, this one issue, I support the entire cause, but this one issue, I just don't feel like I can well represent every single aspect of it. So we had basically come on to Jody as the chairperson, and I believe the co-chair, which North Dakota doesn't really give any insight to, was the previous person, John. So we basically had to end up saying, hey, this seems okay. We don't really need to reword it or anything like that. We can go to the Secretary of State and file this, as long as after we got all the other paperwork done as far as notarizing the sponsors and everything like that. So the next part of it that was really a huge struggling point was the finances. And what a lot of people might not realize, and it's just because we all learned this as well while we were going through it, banks, now it's getting a little bit more acceptable, but banks at the time weren't really approving bank accounts, business bank accounts, for the word cannabis in the name. And the measure was about cannabis. We weren't going to, lie about that. We were going to be completely forthright about that. We want to run everything above board. So when we came there and said, hey, we'd like to open up a bank account, a business bank account for cannabis, and it's a political action committee called ND Freedom of Cannabis Act. When we had done that, we kind of got turned down by a couple of banks. We were trying to figure out the whole finance aspect and how everything was going to be structured. We had finally come upon a bank that would accept us, that was okay with it, based on the fact that we were a political organization, that we weren't selling or, growing or any part of the medical cannabis industry in North Dakota. We were just a political action committee. And they had accepted that, and we had to figure out, okay, well, who is going to be the chairperson, who's going to manage the finances. At the time when we had done this, we had thought that everybody kind of was on board, but that didn't exactly happen. Some people had different views for how the money should be spent or how the money should be approved to be spent. We originally thought that, hey, all of the money is going to go into this one bank account. We're going to have a chairperson that's going to have the final say when it comes to where the funds go and what the funds go to. And that was going to be the way that we were going to run things in the event that we needed money that would be used for the organization. So when we had that conversation, there was also a little bit of point of contention there, but I feel like we had figured all of that out. Come to find out, going forward from that time, we did have a couple people donate, and a couple people, help out, but a lot of it, honestly, was basically the core people that were in management spending their own money and kind of putting their money on the line for this movement. And because of that, that even weighs heavier on all of us. I don't really have an exact number of how much money I had spent, but it was probably a couple $1,000s. And that's probably low for some of the other people that had put money into it. We were talking about even buying candy uh, for parades. We were, buying booth space at different events. We bought space for radio. We have a radio space that still, by the way, is going to go until the end of the year. And I hope to touch on that a little bit more, possibly this weekend, where we'll kind of have a little bit more of going forward. But we had all pretty much been supporting the movement from our own pockets. And while that doesn't absolve us all of any shortcomings that people may believe that we have, it does kind of say to the fact of the people who had managed this and the people who had put their time, money, effort, even petitioners just in general, for putting all of that energy towards everything, and possibly even their money, that almost everybody that was involved has very, very good intentions for the outcome of the group. And if there wasn't any of those intentions, if there was bad intentions, it would have been fairly obvious based on the actions that they had taken before and the decision making that they had done into doing things. Nobody in our campaign that I know of that has done anything to hurt the movement as far as the North Dakota Cannabis Act, North Dakota Freedom of Cannabis Act. So from there, we had filed in July a year ago, and from there we had figured out the whole setup and everything like that, and it kind of turned into, at first it was great. Everything was going fine. We would have weekly meetings. We would all kind of talk in Discord. We would have a lot of communication with each other. Wintertime came around, and because wintertime is a little bit harder to go out and sit outside for a couple hours, or there's not like parades or street fairs or anything like that going on in the wintertime. It had kind of slowed down a little bit, and the biggest thing that anybody ever did was what was in Fargo. In Fargo, they had rented space at the mall. They had gotten a warm place, essentially, which was pretty difficult. They had a warm place to collect signatures. So based on that, we were all trying to figure out our own warm place to collect signatures. In that time, we all work full-time, or most of us work full-time or close to full-time or whatever. And so this wasn't like our top priority. But during the wintertime, I was trying to essentially, figure out what we can do for advertising for once the wintertime's over, what we can do for getting our name out there. Again, I never had any knowledge of anything politics, so I still don't know how to write a press release, for instance. I do know how to contact press and everything like that. Again, GF News was only a month, so it's not like I've seen a bunch of press releases. So, we were all kind of learning everything. Some of us knew a lot more, but yeah. So wintertime was rolling around. We kind of had slowed things down, and it was towards the end of winter when the coronavirus ended up happening. It started towards the end of December, but it wasn't in the U.S. It wasn't affecting the U.S. severely yet. But we had seen that, and at first we were kind of like everybody else. We were like, okay, well, this is a problem, but what's the worst that can happen? Essentially, we are living in the worst that could happen. Let's be completely honest here. It doesn't get much worse, and if it does, it's something that it's pretty unprecedented. We don't really know how to, go any lower. So the beginning of the year had started, and it was at that point where I kind of took a step back and realized, hey, the issue here is we don't know. We have the people that we talk to on an almost daily basis. We have those people. We know that they're petitioning. But this is when I realized one of our biggest flaws. And that biggest flaw was the over accessibility of the petition. It was on our website. It was on the Secretary of State's website. Anybody could print it out. Anybody can start petitioning. And that's something that we encouraged heavily. But at the same time, we didn't really realize what the downfall there was. And that was essentially, we would have people who had printed out the petition, beginning of the campaign, towards the middle, and either way, they had printed out the petition, they had gone out and collected signatures, and it wasn't super clear, where to send those signatures, what, how and what's right and wrong when collecting signatures. Like if somebody on private property has the right to tell you off, they do. But a lot of people, we tried to be a little bit more accessible for people to ask questions, and it was working. But a lot of people, our biggest presence is Facebook. We had YouTube. We were really pushing that. So we noticed that it was very easily accessible and that anybody could print out a petition, and there wasn't much communication between us, who knew a lot more of what was going on, and people who were petitioning. At first, we kind of thought that this wasn't too much of an issue and that people would be, they'd get their packets, they'd get however many signatures they wanted, or they could get, and that they would mail it in. One of the things that we realized was that it wasn't so well laid out as far as how to submit the petition and what to do when you wanted to submit it. And that ended up being one of the major downfalls. On the website, we were basically recommending both. I wish we were just recommending our website because it's a little bit easier for me to track. We were basically recommending both websites, the Secretary of State's website and ours. And based on the analytics that we have for our website, we had at least 700 petitions opened. There's no way for us to track how many were printed out, or at least we didn't have a method for that, because we also were trying to be the least intrusive to people when it comes to them supporting us. We didn't want to, control every aspect or everything that they did. We wanted people who wanted to help, and people who were, able to do it themselves would be able to do it themselves, and the people who needed a little bit more support would be able to contact us. We ended up having all of those opens, at least people viewing it. We can't really track how many people downloaded it, but based on that, we did need 600 petitions and 600 packets in our hands. But again, there was no way for us to figure out how many were saved and how much of it, was filled out. So we wish that we would have been able to track it a little bit better. And at around that time is kind of when, the lockdown, and North Dakota never went into a lockdown, but a lot of people stayed home, and a lot of people were laid off work, and they were afraid to go out. Much like most of us, in just general, we were all afraid of this. People who, had health issues, some people who were medicinal patients and they had other underlying health issues. It was just kind of like, hey, we can't really push people, obviously, because we're not comfortable with it ourselves. So it kind of wound down there. And this was around the time when we had realized that based on those events that we weren't going to be able to make the 2020 deadline. We essentially were kind of just wishing for it to happen. And I feel like what had ended up happening with the wishing, a lot of people were like, oh, well, the next person, the person who's not comfortable, who's comfortable with doing it would be. We felt like the people who were more comfortable with petitioning out would do it on their own. We weren't going to force anybody. We did have a conversation inside saying, hey, we're not going to do this. I feel like we all need to be on the same page about this. We're not going to force people to go out in the middle of a pandemic to petition. And when we talk about petitioning, another thing that some people did realize after that is getting the signatures is one thing, but getting people to vote yes is a completely different thing. A lot of people will know, like a lot of us will tell you, hey, you know, this is how many plans, this is how everything's going to work, this is everything on the measure. You know, we'll kind of give you a little rundown of it, but not everybody was doing that. They were just kind of throwing it in, being like, hey, do you want to sign this ND for Freedom Cannabis Act? Oh, you don't know what it is? And most people would just be like, sure, I do, and sign. And that wasn't us pressuring people to sign. That was just kind of human nature. And we knew that those signatures, there's no way to track that. So we knew that those signatures would be hard to follow up on as far as getting that yes vote. We knew that that was a battle that we had to deal with. And from the time that we had to submit to the election was a very short amount of time. So we kind of took it as, hey, 2020 will be it'll be a lot more difficult in the middle of a pandemic to say, hey, will you vote yes for us, if we even made it onto the ballot by that time. So we felt like 2022 was going to possibly be a better outcome for us in the first place. And based on that, we kind of realized that a lot of people had signed up for 2020 and not a lot of people had signed up for 2022. We had gotten multiple comments of people. We had talked to multiple people, even people internally had the same view, like, hey, you know, we need this now. We want this now. And a lot of people, when we first were talking about the measure, the actual measure that's in right now, we were talking about, hey, this is a 10-year fight. You know, we'll get some ground here, but that's not to say that it's going to be perfect in execution. And if it's not perfect in execution, we're all willing to put a little bit more time and effort into getting it the right way. So we had the 2020 had come and gone. We still, technically under the state law, it has to be 120 days before an election, but you also have a year. So the question that some people have asked is, well, 2022 is like 2 years away. Why can't you guys get more signatures? Because once you submit in the petition, it's either 120 days before an election or a year from when you had submitted it. So today is the year anniversary of when we had submitted in the petition. So essentially from the time that the 2020 deadline had passed to the 2022 deadline, we didn't really have too much time, but it was then that we realized how many signatures that we had gotten. And it came fast. We didn't have many going into 2020 deadline, but weeks before, like a couple weeks before that deadline, we had gotten a lot of them. So we kind of used, and this was our next mistake. I don't even know how many mistakes we had made, but this was our next mistake. We had used that as a benchmark for figuring out for the 2022 deadline. And I think that is kind of where the issue had come, where we had a bunch of packets, we had them, and we didn't really, I guess we did count some of them, but we didn't count all of them because they were just kind of coming in, day out. There was petitions, and this wasn't like, a box of them came in. It was like 2 or 3 petitions in one envelope, 1 or 2 petitions in another. So it would kind of turn into, we're going to get a bunch of them and then we're going to count them up. And those had gone to the chairperson. We were also, at the time when the pandemic was happening, because we were kind of slowing down, because we weren't all going to go out and petition, it kind of turned into, we're kind of taking a break, but we're not. And some people wanted to go ahead and continue petitioning and other people didn't. And the people that didn't was basically most of the core people. We had a couple people that still wanted to, but most of the core people, we figured and we knew that this wasn't safe and we don't need to put people in danger for the idea to say yes or no to something. So the communication had kind of slowed down there. We didn't like get into a fight or anything like that. It was just kind of, hey, there's really nothing going on this week, so we probably shouldn't go on to Discord and have a meeting. That was also another huge mistake of ours. We were trying to stay in contact with each other. We were trying to, give each other updates and everything like that. Some of us had tried a little bit more than the others. I know one of my biggest downfalls was a lot of the people in cities had set up like a meeting. Fargo had kind of actually started the whole thing. Fargo had basically, they had it down split. They had basically, hey, we have the radio show. Right after the radio show, we have the, in-person meeting. You can come take a packet. You can ask some questions, answer some questions, check in and everything like that. It was in person. And obviously during the pandemic, that wasn't possible. But we had the idea of, hey, we're going to roll that back out to other cities. I work 11:30 to 8, Monday through Saturday. Actually, on Saturday, I work till 6, and it's 9 o'clock start time. But basically, we were all working full time, and I kind of didn't really know where to go or what to set up or even if people would show up. And I guess a lot of my actions in Grand Forks, as far as this goes, kind of dealt a lot with anxiety. Like, hey, I'm going to put myself out there, and then absolutely no one's going to show up, and then I'm going to look like an idiot. And so that kind of kept me back from wanting to start it in Grand Forks. And so because of that, Grand Forks, we had a couple of like big players in Grand Forks that were getting petitions and were, getting signatures. I feel like I kind of let Grand Forks down when it comes to that, simply because I was dealing with website, trying to figure where to go next, what to do next, how to get our words out, how to get everything out there. But I had basically neglected the entire reason why I got involved, and that was for petitioning. It turned into, there wasn't any animosity or anything like that, but it kind of turned into Grand Forks doesn't really have anybody in it. Towards the end, I did try to, get a little bit more going. I was always available to meet up with somebody to have them sign. It wasn't super known, but I had mentioned a couple times, people would tag me in posts and I'd be like, hey, let's meet up and you can sign or I can give you a petition. But it never turned into an event where we would have a meeting once a week. People in Bismarck Bismarck was really good at that as well. They had rolled out what Fargo had done in their area, and that was very successful, and I just don't know why I didn't do that in Grand Forks. So yeah, we'd essentially kind of slowed down. We had ramped everything back up closer to the deadline. And I think in that time when we had slowed down, stopped the meetings, and that our communication issues basically got compounded. We never really had communication issues before, but it was kind of like, we only will go and have these meetings if there's something to talk about, and not anything to just, talk, not as friends, but as like, hey, bounce some ideas off of me. I had some ideas that were going to be awesome, but, that was the thing, is we were all funding it ourselves. I can just say what my idea is now, but it's not going to happen. We were going to get glass pipes, and they were going to be ND Cannabis Caucus pipes. I had gone down to even figuring out samples and everything like that, and yeah, so that was going to be a big idea. But the thing is we all had these ideas, and the funding was never there. But it's not, it's not your guys' job to give us money to do a possible. And that's something that we were never comfortable in asking. There's no guarantee that your dollar is going to go to get it on the ballot. There was a guarantee that your dollar would be used and matched in the campaign, but there was never we would never be able to guarantee that, and we felt uncomfortable with pushing, fundraising for that, because a lot of us, we all work, probably full-time jobs, hourly wages. We're not like rich by any means. And so because of that, we know, what the cost of a dollar is and how much work that it takes to get, $100. That's a lot. So that was the difficult part for us to try to get fundraising. And because of that, we were all just trying to keep the balls in the air, trying to get everything. And we have, website from what I can list for myself. There was domain, website, tech stuff, the music that we use for Canna heads, for basically videos and anything like that. The monthly cost for the Adobe Creative Suite. It's something that I enjoy doing, so like I have no problem with paying for it, and now I have an excuse for using it. But it definitely wasn't like, it all was for the enjoyment. It was mostly for getting this done and having this happen. And we learned a lot, and that's the thing, is we learned a lot of what to do, what not to do, what we would do next time, what we do, not do next time, how we would run things. We learned a lot. And so really the point of this video was just to kind of explain the whole story, at least that I know it, from start to finish, of everything that happened and how it all came apart. But that's not the end. That's the thing. And a lot of us, like I was saying before, we signed up for a 10-year fight. We knew that if this passed, it wasn't going to be perfect. It wasn't going to be, everything that we all had voted for. And a very good example of that would be the Medicinal Act, the medicinal marijuana in North Dakota. It had passed with many different facets to it that ended up getting kind of cut out. And that actually was also another example of what the difference between a constitutional and statutory is. And that's probably the biggest example that I use when I explain the difference. The medicinal marijuana law is a statutory law, and in order to change that law, essentially the legislators just need a 2/3 majority. And that's all it takes. It doesn't take people saying yes or no. It just takes people who work in politics to say yes or no, which is a lot easier to get an answer for yes. And because of that, many things were changed. Some things were brought back up to the table, and a lot of BS had flown during those hearings. And we've tried to kind of show people, this is kind of the reason why constitutional law for this type of thing should be there, because it's still a taboo subject. It's becoming less of a taboo subject, but it's still a taboo subject, and the way that society views it is very, like, they're starting to warm up to it, but there's still a lot there that, there's a lot of people think, oh yeah, this they just want to get high, or they're stoners, they're just trying to like make this so that they can't get in trouble or whatever. It's starting to kind of go down a little bit, but there's still that view amongst a lot of people, and it's not a partisan issue, but there are more people on one side of the we're going to call it a scale on one side of the scale than there is on the other. So what I kind of want to finish this off with, this isn't the end. I mean, I had learned about how many signatures we had probably like 4 or 5 hours ago. We kind of dropped the ball on that. We were really hoping that we would just get a bunch in, kind of how the deadline for 2020 was. And yeah, it just kind of, it fell away from us on there. But we still have a very solid foundation of supporters. We still have a very solid foundation of the measure. We now know what a lot of people, oppose to our measure. We know a lot of people, wanted answers to problems and questions that, to be honest, we didn't want to, it's not negative, but we didn't want to, discredit another group for our cause, because a lot of people's views are different, and a lot of people don't understand the issue that occurred. And I'm hoping that this video kind of explains just kind of how it was and kind of how it is. We are very much planning on continuing on resubmitting and repetitioning. Obviously, the signatures that we have now, we are going to probably either hire a service to shred it or probably have a bonfire. We're not sure, but we have these signatures. We need to get rid of them somehow, but none of the signatures that are in right now would count for the next measure that we submit. And that's also a good thing, in the fact that now petitioners kind of know a little bit about more of what they should do and how they should, what the right and wrong thing to do is and how to submit it and everything like that. We now have a lot of petitioners that know kind of what to expect. And we hope a lot of you stay and go for the next round. But the thing is we understand that this might be too much for people. and that is perfectly fine. We hope that if it's too much for you, that you would still vote yes if we do end up on a ballot. But now we know kind of, hey, this was a point of contention. We can change it here. We kind of have more of a setup network and what to do and how to expect it. So a lot of us are more hopeful to going forward. As far as going forward, I'll kind of have a little bit more information. We do have some clips that we have of kind of proof of everything that happened, and maybe a little bit more in-depth jump into it, because the best way to learn is from your mistakes. But also, the best way to learn from your mistakes is to go back and rewatch them, and go back and look back at them and try to see, things that you might not even remember off the top of your head. A lot of what I said here today, there's a lot of days and weeks and months that, were on the timeline that, I didn't remember or didn't think to mention because I didn't think it was, adding to the story here of how everything went. So what I can tell you is, if you're not, if you're let down, that is very, that is a very valid feeling, and that is a very valid view. A lot of us are. We all put a lot of effort, and we all tried our best, and we really, some of it that we hid from people for, like, as far as, the different disagreements that people had, we didn't really want to make it public because that's dramatic. There's no need for that. And a lot of that may have burned friendships, and may have, put people who weren't comfortable with, telling people that we're for cannabis or, anything like that. A lot of friendships may have been lost to that, and we put a lot on the line to kind of drop the ball, and that is something that I will probably never forget. And I feel like while it sucks, a lot of us are going to probably take time to understand everything. I will probably be continuing Canna Heads and helping, Canna-Talk and everything like that. But a lot of us, you may see a little bit less posts from us, less ND Cannabis Caucus stuff for a little while we kind of, reflect on everything, have conversations about how everything went and what happened, and how we could do better and what we shouldn't do again. And these are the things that we plan on returning back and resubmitting under maybe some changes, but mostly kind of the same idea. The same core belief will still be there. I think a lot of us are excited to go again, but a lot of us are nervous. And a big part of the nervousness and a big part of the anxiety is the fact that we put ourselves out there, we pushed, we got our names out there and everything like that. It failed. And now we have to start from square one and go again. And some of those people will just be like, you guys again? And we hope that people don't take that in a negative way. And yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to say is it sucks right now, but that doesn't mean that it's over. We all, as far as the internal part of us, we all signed up for a 10-year battle. Some of us might not be ready for that 10-year battle, and that's perfectly acceptable. If you are ready for a 10-year battle, or if you want to get more involved, if this interested you, you feel like you can add, even if you're just going out for signatures or anything like that, if you feel like you can jump in, you definitely can. And you can definitely reach out to us, and we would be more than happy to have your help. And if you feel like we can do something different or something better, there is absolutely no problem with bringing it up. We all kind of work, none of us are like the head person. We have the chair, and we respect the chair's decision. We have, the finance section. We respect their decision. We respect each other's decision, but at the same time, we know that there might be a different view and there might be a different idea, and that's something that we can definitely take under consideration, have a very long conversation about it, and if it's mostly acceptable to most of us, go ahead and do it. There was one thing, I guess a couple of things that just really was just like, when I realized that, hey, there's a problem here. We obviously were getting the question of how many signatures do you have and all that stuff. A lot of us kind of didn't know. And we also didn't want to be like, yeah, we only have 20 petitions, because nobody has mailed theirs in. And another thing is one of the things that we never wanted to do was be a pest to people. And because of that, we weren't calling people weekly or, calling them and hounding them down for packets. We're never going to be like that. We're never going to want to be like that. We want people involved who want to be involved. And if they don't feel comfortable with continuing them being involved, it is perfectly fine. At the same light, that might also have been our downfall, but that is a downfall that, in my opinion, is perfectly fine. So we have that, people asking that. If you feel like we had brushed you off with that question, it was simply because we didn't know. After about the beginning of the year, the COVID-19 issue, a lot of us were kind of talking a little bit less. And from there, we didn't really have an up-to-date count. And yeah, so we had that question. Another one is, what qualifies you to doing something like this? Or, why don't you hire a, corporate political campaign manager or anything like that? Again, we were all kind of wearing a lot of different hats. I had done some campaign manager stuff. I had done, some advertising stuff, marketing. Tech stuff was just all me and Anthony. But a lot of us were wearing a lot of different hats, and we felt like, each person's strong suit. And if it wasn't if you didn't feel comfortable with it, we still had somebody, and usually that was me, of hey, can you figure out this problem? And at the same time, we're a grassroots organization. We're not corporate America. So yeah, we're learning, but we all know what mistakes we have made, and if we don't, we're going to be learning them while we kind of recount and rethink about what happened. So yeah, we're probably going to go through everything that had happened. I don't have a lot of everything, but we do have a couple things that I think might be very helpful for people to understand what happened here, and to kind of, I don't know, not to gain trust, but at the same time of being like, hey, this was your campaign too. You were a petitioner too. You were a signer too. This wasn't only us. This was you guys. So at the end of the day, as far as when it comes to that, it would probably be helpful for a lot of people to kind of think of like, hey, this is what, this was what was happening in the background. So this is my dog. But yeah, I feel like this is probably a good place to stop it, but it's not the end. We're going to have a little bit more discussion about this on Sunday. I'm planning on going through everything, and hopefully we can all, understand everything, and hopefully we can go forward. And yeah, other than that, I really do want to say thank you to everybody for I said it at the beginning because I know a bunch of people are just going to click off, but if you had gone through this entire video, thank you very much. Feel free to share it, obviously, but the one thing I want everybody to kind of walk out of here from this video thinking is that while, yes, it sucks, we're still going to go forward, and we're still going to get this on a ballot, and we're still going to pass this. A lot of us, again, ready for that 10-year fight. If you feel like you are ready yourself, message the page, email us on the website, anything like that. And it's history. We're making history. And yeah, I'm hoping that we can be on the right side of history. So with that, I will see you guys on Sunday. And stay tuned for news. Probably tonight we do have an interview probably posting, but we'll have a little bit more information on the Facebook page. But thank you guys. You guys have a great rest of your day. I know this was morning. You probably were expecting a hell of a lot less, and I'm sorry for that. But you guys have a great rest of your day.